So I'm Joanna Egan, and I work, and Whitney, my colleague here, we work in Tourism Atlantic ACOA. So it's we work on Pan-Atlantic tourism files for ACOA. We're based in PEI, but we work with the 4 provinces. And we develop tools like the ones we're going to run through to support our account managers who work in the field with destinations and operators. We also have Pan-Atlantic files ourselves that we work on depending on the client. But I, in particular, work with Newfoundland and Labrador and New Brunswick, and Whitney works with Nova Scotia and PEI. So if you're on the standing offer list and you're working with, say, a rural community in Newfoundland, I likely will be working closely with you on that, because we do stay quite tied to the files once they're in place, because we have developed them and have a good understanding in terms of what works well and what doesn't. So yeah, so we stay quite engaged, and I'll just let Whitney say hi so you can, and if there's anything you want to add, Whitney.
Hi everybody. No, I think that pretty well covers it, Joanna. Like Joe said, we've supported the design of these programs, so we'll just take some time today to run through the high points in them, and just remind everyone that the full program manuals are available on the TIAPEI website if you want to take a deeper dive on anything. And I'm also just going to pop our email addresses into the chat. If you want to copy those down, you can feel free to reach out directly to Joanna or myself if you have questions on anything that we talk about today.
Yeah, it's great. So we'll if you can pop it in the chat, and if we may have time at the end. We're not sure if we think we're pretty close here. But if you're more comfortable just having a one-on-one chat with us, send an email and we can either have a call or whatever. We can figure it out that way. So yeah, we felt like there is a lot to digest in terms of the information that was provided in the call out. So we want to take the time that would be beneficial just to high level walk through these. So we have the 4 programs, and in true government fashion, all acronyms, right? But they seem to work for us. And I'll walk through STAR and STEP, which is the destination development tools. DMR has a bit of both, which Whitney will chat about, and also the AMR program. Just want to, we're not going to get into the weeds in terms of the stages of the STEP and STAR programs, because there's a lot there, but I do really encourage you to take your time going through the manuals, because they're very comprehensive, and a lot of time and effort went into helping outline what is the consultant's role in each of these stages, what's the working committee's role, and I think that will really help give you a sense of how the programs can flow. That said, I find they read like they are templated, but there's a lot of the resources and tools that are associated with the programs are meant to be, some are more mandatory than others, but a lot of them are options for you when say you're doing a stakeholder session. There's tools there that you can use as a resource if you so choose. So there is fluidity within the stages and in the timing too, and that's something you can kind of work through with your working committee at that time. But I just wanted to kind of preface with that, because when you kind of get into the manuals, I was going through them the other day, and you can kind of think like, oh, I have to do this at this time, but there is that flexibility. So before we get into the destination development programs with STAR and STEP, I want to kind of give you a sense of how we get to the point of having a project. So for instance, we may have an account manager in, let's say, Twillingate, Newfoundland, for instance. They may come forward and say they're interested in doing some planning. What do you guys think makes sense in terms of a tool to use? So we have a sustainable tourism screening tool that we would get 5 or 6 stakeholders in that destination, likely the account manager who's in the field working, who knows it well, and typically a provincial rep from the tourism side, to run the tool through the community. It looks at, what are the strengths, what are the key assets, where there's some potential deficiencies that they need to work on, is there leadership in place to take on a program like this? So they come back with the results, and then we would have a conversation around, like, okay, what program makes sense to move forward with? At that stage, they would apply for funding. And then once the funding is approved, an RFP would go out to the qualified consultants. So they can select, this is relatively new, before they would go out to the full list, but we realized that wasn't super efficient on both sides. And especially as interest has grown and the number of consultants has grown. So now they'll be able to select, depending on what their contracting requirements are, might be a minimum of 5 they have to go out to. that they would issue the RFP to. I will say though, the RFPs, we have a template that they can build off of. Obviously, they'll be customized for the destination, but you should see relative consistency between the RFPs that come out for a STAR program, for instance, depending on that, no matter where the destination is. That's just to give you a sense of how we get to the point of a project. So what is STAR? So this is destination planning for regions. And a question we often get is like, okay, so how do you define a region? And we've realized that we don't get into really saying, okay, it has to be this size and scope in terms of a geographic lens. It really comes down to what makes sense from a product and services standpoint to define, to warrant it being a destination. So it depends on where those key assets are that would determine, okay, how far you would go in terms of the regional lens. So for instance, when STAR took place in Grossmoorn, they did it with 7 communities in the Grossmoorn region. So just to give you a sense of size and scope that it could be. So it really depends. The next slide, I will talk a little bit more about that. But so yeah, 7-stage process. And it gets in, you can see it on the slide there, things like trends, experiential product development. You'll see in the manual, there's a lot there around activities you would do with them, and there's dollars in the budgets for capacity building for training. So it's really raising the bar in terms of the capacity of not only the destination level, but the operator level too, depending on what type of training you recommend that they do. It's also very important that they're linked to existing strategies that are in place. That's feedback we've gotten over time, is that a lot of these destinations have been consulted already to a certain extent. So we want to make sure we're not, starting from ground zero again. So for instance, I'm referencing Newfoundland again because I work closely with them, but they have destination development plans throughout the province that the provincial government has put in place. Very comprehensive. But so we recommend when a consultant goes in with a STAR or a STEP, a first step would be to look at, okay, what's the DDP? How can we build off that for this particular, niche area of the destination? So that's something that's really fundamental to the STAR planning process. Typically delivered, I have in there 18 to 24 month period, and that it depends, and I'll talk a bit more about that further along, but that does include, once the plan's done, there's a mentoring point at the 3 months post-plan, 6 months post-plan, and 12 months. So this 18 to 24 month period includes that mentoring timeframe. So key differences between STAR and STEP. I put this in here because it's a question we get a lot, and I'm assuming at this point you already kind of looked through some of the documentation, so this might have popped out to you guys as well. So from a geographic standpoint, like I said, it's a region, and I know I said we didn't get into like really quantifying exactly what that means, but we have added recently that it typically, and I stress typically, would be more than 4,000 people in the entire area, and evidence of regional thinking and partnerships already existing. Whereas with STEP, it's one community, and typically, again, that's typical. It could be or may not be, but typically 4,000 or less in that community. And it may involve some smaller neighbors depending on where some of those key assets are relative to that core community. Brand recognition, this is one that helps, I find me personally distinguish between the two as well, is with STAR, these would be destinations that the visitors already has it as a primary motivator for travel. So it's a destination that's the reason they're visiting the province. Whereas with STEP, it may be a destination that they would visit once they're in the province. So, they may go to Charlottetown, but then they may travel out to Georgetown, for instance, where we did STEP in Georgetown. Tourism leadership. So a STAR, the working committee members should be easily identifiable off the top. There should be some really obvious leaders and champions in the destination, whereas with STEP, there's potential for cohesiveness and identification of these members, but the consultant has to play a bit more of a stronger role in helping identify who those key stakeholders are and trying to bring them to the table and round out that working committee. And from a focus standpoint, regional, obviously with STAR, there's a lot more, I don't have this in here, I should, but a lot more emphasis on communication engagement just because you're dealing with so many more stakeholders. And it's kind of a way to think about it is when you get into kind of the weeds of the steps, they are kind of similar, but where you see the biggest differentiators is the volume of engagement and the different engagement exercises you would do in STAR versus STEP, because you're trying to, you know, tease out those different product ideas and those in the different communities. What are the unique strengths and weaknesses of the different communities? Whereas when you're dealing with just one community, obviously that's more straightforward. So that's the major difference, is the level of engagement and input needed for a STAR versus a STEP. There's also a couple key similarities, I just jotted them down here, that both have a comprehensive toolbox in the manual. So like I said off the top, there's those resources you can choose to use when you're working with different, conducting your stakeholder sessions. You don't have to, you might have some in your own toolbox you want to use to complement some of those. And then the mentoring piece is also consistent for both. And, oh, sorry, and there's also examples of capacity building sessions that have worked well in previous destinations in the toolbox as well, that folks seem to find useful, and templates in terms of like what the plan can look like, and implementation plan templates. So there's a lot there, but meant to be good resources for you. So what's the STAR process? Like I said earlier, it takes place over 18-24 months, but that's a guide. We find this can vary, and it depends on two things. A, how far along they are in the destination planning process, like when you start with them, and also the timing of the year when they start. So when we first launched these programs, we were like, you know, these need to happen 12 months of the year, doesn't matter peak season, it's important to keep momentum, keep people engaged. But what we quickly realized was that's not realistic, and people, you know, these operators, they're flat out in the summer, and it's difficult to get them to a stakeholder session in July. So we've, totally understand now the realities of that. And so that will come into effect in terms of how you sequence things, depending on the time of year that they start. We do recommend still having some touch points with them in, you know, July, August, but not doing any of the heavy lifting sessions at that time. So I'm just going to watch time here, but quickly, I'll just, with the stages here. So stage one would be your preliminary research. There's some tools there you'd get into in terms of the assets. There's an asset inventory tool that you would start at this stage. This is where the working committee would get finalized, the chair would get established, an executive committee, which I'll spend a bit of time on because it's relative to both of the STAR and STEP. We added this, we did a refresh on the programs a couple of years, 2 years ago, I think, and we added this executive committee where it would be the consultant, the chair, the proponent, so could be like the municipality, for instance, in the case of a STAR, the funders, so it could be a COA, the province, and who else? I think that's it. Yeah. So it's meant to be just a kind of an informal working group that maybe once a month there's touch points where it gives you, the consultant, a chance to bounce anything off kind of a smaller group. This is, you know, I'm hearing this. Does this, have you heard this in previous STARs? Does this make sense? And so it's meant just to kind of give a little sounding board. We're not obviously trying to get in and direct anything, but just it seems to help from a communication standpoint for both sides. So we've gotten really good feedback on adding that layer. Stage two, so this is where you'd really get familiar with the region. So you'd tour the region, you would host individual community meetings at this stage. You'd establish a communications framework, which is super important, particularly in STAR when you're dealing with so many stakeholders. You would host the first stakeholder session, which is for the broader region. And this is where you'd introduce STAR to the region, you know, discuss some of your initial findings from your first stage. And then at stage three, there's another stakeholder session where it's more like a roll up your sleeves, get in there, and we have different tools you can use at that stage, from like visioning exercises, ways to do idea generation. So it's meant to really get a lot of input from them at this point. Then at stage four, this is when you'd start to draft your plan based on, you know, you have quite a bit of inputs at this point. There's a regional survey template that we suggest going out to the broader region and residents, just a way to get some additional inputs. And then there's a round two of community meetings. And at this point, it's It's not broad. It's meant to be a chance for you to, you know, pass on some of your initial recommendations that seem to be formulating, get some validation and a chance for them to give some additional input, but it's more focused at this point. Then stage 5, this is where you would present your draft plan back to your working committee. And this is where the capacity building sessions would launch. This is really training. We always use capacity building, but training sessions. And you wouldn't, the STAR consultant doesn't necessarily put these on. There's incremental budget, and I have a budget slide on here for you to see. But you would, based on what you've been seeing in your research, you would suggest particular topics that this destination would benefit from training for its stakeholders. So and you may have some recommendations on experts in that field, or you may have that background yourself, and you can talk about that at the time with the working committee. But typically it would be a little more niche, like maybe it's digitalization in tourism, where you would bring in an expert in the field to do a session on that. So there's a series of those that would take place. Stage 6 is where you present your final. You may continue with some more of those sessions, and then key is to start implementing. And one thing we've added with the programs is when the plan is done, there's dollars there for a part-time project manager to be the one kind of waking up and thinking about implementing the plan, because where we really were seeing these fall short is those communities that didn't have that capacity when the consultant stepped away. So this is meant to really keep things moving forward, and we've just instilled it. So we don't have examples of total traction yet, but Bonavista, for instance, they finished their STAR, and right now they're into their implementation project with the project manager in place, so we're getting some good feedback on that. And then stage 7, this is really that year after the plan's done, where there's those 3, 6, 12-month check-in points. Nothing too onerous here. I think we built in, I think it's an additional day of the consultant's time for each of these. And it's really meant to be a chance for, I think it's twofold. It gives them accountability to keep things moving. And there's a little, I think we call it a interim report card or something which is a little elementary, but it's meant to, it's a report they would give you on the actions and how they're getting along with them. And it also gives them a chance to still have access to you in terms of if they want to, you know, things aren't working and they want to recalibrate some of the recommendations, or maybe do resequence how the priorities were laid out. It gives them that chance to connect with you. So that's the additional 12 months. So just quickly, yeah, I'll just be up here. Okay, so the consultant, you would guide the region through those first 4 stages. Ideally, around stage 5, we like to see a shift where the consultant works more as a mentor, and in the region starts to take more ownership of the plan. Again, based on experiences, where the ones where they don't have this shift tend to be the projects, or the plans that don't get the traction that they need when the consultant steps away. So it's trying to build that ownership and accountability during the process when you're still involved. And I think in the manual, you'll see there's some kind of guiding principles around that in each of the stages, how you can start to foster that. I do find with STAR, because you are getting some very strong leaders around the table, it seems to happen a little more naturally than STEP, but that's really key here. So yeah, so the rest I think is we've kind of talked about in terms of drafting and the plan. So key outcomes. So at the end of this, they would have a strategic regional tourism plan and also an implementation plan. That's kind of like a sub of that. And you'll see there's a template in the manual that kind of outlines what that can look like. And essentially here we're looking for, because this was added in based on experience, where some plans were getting kind of like broad sweeping recommendations. And when the consultant left, they felt they didn't have the level of detail to action some of these. So the implementation piece is meant to be, it outlines, you know, kind of recommended timing, who would be responsible, who timing, when, all those details that they could kind of have like a little, it's almost like an Excel sheet, right? That's simple, they can follow, and it's something for the project manager to use as a guide when the consultants moved on. They'd have a statement of their assets via that inventory that you did. And that's really a good tool as a benchmark that we recommend they look at each year to see how things are progressing. They have a network of leaders, and that's a huge thing, is having that ownership within the region. And a real key here is improved communication. I know it sounds obvious, but it's amazing how I find anytime I work with groups, how you kind of assume, like in Grossmoor, for instance, those 7 communities, you assume they are in contact a lot, they share, and it's very much they work in isolation and there's silos that are happening. So anytime we, when we go in and kind of get feedback on this, usually the biggest takeaway and what we get the most positive feedback on is the improved communication and regional thinking that these destinations have taken on. And then the bank of training tools and the project manager, obviously, to action the plan is a really key outcome for this. And performance measures are in place. Sorry, that's the other thing I was trying to think of. In the implementation plan, we would have like what would constitute success for each of those priorities or actions. So STAR budget. So here, this would be what the client, this is our total budget, but it's important for you to see this so you can understand where the funds are coming from for those incremental pieces. So the consultant fee for a STAR would range between 37 and 47, and the higher end would typically be, if you're working, it depends on the location of the destination, because say you're traveling to northern New Brunswick, for instance, it's going to be additional time on your part. So that's important to recognize. Then we have dollars there for the capacity building. So that's, remember I mentioned, like say you're doing a session on digitalization and tourism, you have dollars there to, the community would, or the client would have dollars to bring in experts. You would not be responsible for contracting them. There's dollars for the digital assessment tool, which that's outlined in quite a bit of detail in the manuals. So that's, because it's quite niche, that would be something that would be contracted out as well, but would feed into your overall plan. There's dollars here for best practice mission, GMIS training, and AMR, which Whitney's going to talk about in more detail, AMR. But what we were finding was these 3 things were coming out as consistent recommendations for STAR and STEP. So we decided to embed the funds into the budget, because it saves the client coming back to us with incremental project when it's something we certainly, these are solutions that we have and they make sense. So there's dollars there for them to go on a mission with a couple of key stakeholders to a like destination and bring back some ideas. Obviously, this is pre-COVID in an ideal world. So in the current environment, we haven't been doing those. GMIS training, so this is experiential product development, and we have close relationship with Jonathan, so we can, depending on what the needs are, talk to GMIS about the type of training that might make sense for this group. Or again, pre-COVID, in some cases, we would see some working committee members go to Grossmoor, to Edge of the Wedge, for instance, to their training. AMR, I'll park that because Whitney's going to talk about that. Then we have travel, which would be your travel to and from the destination, and then other admin, and then the project manager, the part-time post plan. So that's the STAR budget. So key criteria for the consultant, you would have seen the call for proposals. We have overarching criteria for all 4 programs, and then there's the niche criteria for each. So you would have seen that on what Corinne had sent out on TIAPEI's site. So let's start. I think I should just keep rolling, Whitney. Just looking at you here. Trying to think, yeah, okay. So STEP, I won't spend as much time because they are, as I said earlier, they're so related, and the big thing is just the more communication and engagement that STAR takes on. STEP has been around quite a bit longer, and it really came about because we were finding from our seats, we were getting a lot of one-off requests from communities for planning or projects, and there wasn't necessarily, we were seeing a lack of strategic kind of lens to all the projects that were coming in. So that was the impetus for STEP, and as a result, we've had several in each province, and we are finding that the projects that come in now are more strategic and tied to that kind of strategic visioning off the top, and it's been really helpful from our seats. So just to give you a sense of size and scope of these, we've done them in Alma, for instance, which is the gateway to Fundy, Alma, New Brunswick, Georgetown, PEI, I mentioned them earlier, Surrey, PEI, Twillingate in Newfoundland and Labrador, Parsborough, Nova Scotia. So those are just examples in each province to give you a sense of this, what the size looks like. So it's at the end of this, they have a sustainable tourism action plan. Typically, we recommend, between 3 to 5 years in terms of outlook on that. And you can see on the slide there, nothing too above and beyond. We've already been saying, building on the strengths, tied to existing plans, generates a platform for your operators to better communicate and cooperate. Again, feedback we tend to get is always positive around that. And very important to have a strong industry-led working committee, and also to have provincial involvement. This is the same for STAR, I should have said that earlier. We find the working committees that have more industry around the table tend to have more success. So that's something that we don't say is mandatory, but we recommend that that's the case, that we don't give like it needs to be a minimum of X amount of industry, but definitely something you want to keep in mind when you're helping them formulate the committee, because like I said, with STEP, you will be more involved in terms of helping them figure out who makes sense to have around the table. So STEP process, 7 steps, and same as with STAR, the timing depends on the time of year they start and how far along they are. And usually you would set a rough timeline at the outset. That obviously can shift, but I think that's helpful on your end and also at the community, and just to kind of have a sense of how things are going to flow. So like I said, I won't get into all the details here, it's in the book, but step 1, this is, you're getting your working committee finalized, the tourism asset inventory is here as well. You would host your first stakeholder session here where you introduce the community to STEP. Step 2 is where you're kind of more getting into your research, the secondary research. There's the digital footprint tool we would recommend get launched here. There's a tool in here called the Tourism Diagnostic Analysis, which you could also use. Step 3 is the second stakeholder session, which similar to STARS, where it's more not time intensive, but you're getting more out of them, trying to do visioning and idea generation exercises. This is where you likely would start penning your draft. And then in step 4, you would submit the draft to the working committee for feedback. And you would also, typically what we recommend with STEP is you would host your capacity building sessions, maybe in conjunction with, so say you're meeting with your working committee on the plan, you may add in a capacity building session and invite other broader stakeholders to that session. It's just trying to maximize your time working with the community and the reach you may have to the stakeholders with them already engaged. So that could be, and there's lots of examples of what those capacity building sessions could look like. And you can, we recommend planning a series of those based on the findings you have to date, or sorry, from your research. And then same thing, step 5, you have your stakeholder session with a capacity building session. And then step 6 is where you present the final plan to the broader stakeholders and maybe host something at the same time from a training perspective. And around here, they should really secure their project manager for that post-plan period, that part-time person. And again, you'd have that 3, 6, 12-month post-plan mentoring. And there's also a report card for step 2. So there's a lot of similarities. I think when you get into it, you will just really realize that, well, you can even just from me chatting here in STAR, you have your individual community meetings, right? Twice, you do that twice. Obviously, you don't have that here with STEP. Well, one thing I should say, sounds like a lot of consultation. We have had feedback on that. Like I know we did it with Bonavista on STAR. They're like, wow, this is a lot. But once they got through it, they understood the different goals of each of the consultation pieces. And I think at the end, they almost said they wanted more, which was surprising. But a recommendation I would have for you when you're working with these groups is to really, I think the more you define what each session is meant to do, the more enthused and engaged your stakeholders would be. So that's something I think we've added that into the manual to really try to make sure they understand what the purpose is of that second community consult, for instance, versus the first, so they can kind of get on board. That was, yeah, so that's just something to keep in mind. Oh, consult roles. So nothing too new here. So you guide them through it. Same thing, you want to make sure you're guiding, and obviously at the earlier stage, you're the lead, but then shifting to that mentor role. And you can even have them, we recommend at the end, it's the community up there presenting the plan. You're there to support them, but it's their plan, and that helps facilitate that ownership. And the broader stakeholders see them up there being the champions for the plan. So that's something that we would recommend you try to facilitate. So there's the plan, but also that implementation piece, which we already talked about, that really has the action items identified. And there's the check-in points at the 3, 6, and 12 months post-plan. Key outcomes, we've kind of already talked about this. If anyone has questions, they have the plan, the network, working committee, project manager. I just popped in a few testimonials here. Step Parsborough, Lewisburg. You can kind of read them there. As you can see, it has lots to around the communication being a real outcome. And in Twillingate in the bottom there, they say benefited significantly and continues to as a result of STEP. Several new businesses and entrepreneurs in the region due to STEP. So having that, we've heard that a few times, is those communities that have that vision in place, it is appealing for new entrepreneurs, and they're trying to figure out where they want to set up shop. We heard that in Alma as well. They had a few cases of that some young entrepreneurs, you know, seeing that they have that longer term vision, it was motivating for them to choose Alma as a location. So budget, same line items as STAR, just scale back. So we have your consultant's fee. Same thing, the range would depend on location. Other is for those sessions that would be hosted, bring in experts as needed. You have the digital assessment tool, which gets contracted out. The mission, GMIST, AMR, then your travel, that's as needed. And other facility equipment rental, admin, project manager, post plan. So again, just scaled down. So same thing as the other, we had kind of that overarching criteria, and then the 2 more niche criteria for STEP. And that's it for the STAR and STEP. Did any questions pop up? And again, Whitney's going to share our emails, so if you want to talk directly, we can do that too.
Hi, Joanna, it's Dee. Nice
to
meet
you.
I was a little bit late. You may have answered it, and we can take it offline if that's better with Whitney. And one of my questions, just looking at budgets, under each step in the STAR, there's an AMR budget. Do those get contracted separately then?
Yeah, that's a great question. They are, and it's not to say the same. If you were certified for both, it's not to say you couldn't do the AMR, but we do. They would be 2 separate pieces. Yeah.
Okay, and the consultant wouldn't manage the whole budget. That's
no.
Region or a COA. That's just to give us a sense of the other. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's almost like too much. Yeah, and it does. It's almost too much info, but we feel like it's important for you to see what the client's budget would be for those, like capacity building, for instance. You have a sense of what they have to work with when bringing in experts. Yeah.
And so then I guess the final part of that question is, when I was reading through it, it talks about the consultant and tends to refer to it as a single. Do you have consultants who come as a team, or does it tend to be a single person?
We have seen that, yeah. You would have to both be certified. We have, so yes, you can do that. And we also have seen that in particular when there's bilingual needs. Yeah. You may want to, we've seen Anglophones partner up with Francophone consultants in that capacity.
Okay, so that would happen. So, I mean, I know Bernie's on here and she's got a team of people. You know, I have a group of people I work with. So if I go in there to certify, it's just DN right versus Jebka strategies. So it's not the company that's certified. I would need each person on my team to certify. And then when an RFP comes out, we would submit as a team. Is that right?
Yeah, we're certifying individuals. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, well, I'll turn it over to Whitney then, and we'll leave some time at the end too, if there's any further questions.
Okay, great. I apologize for being a bit of a shadowy figure here. I've got some backlighting, but I'll try to lean up closely so you can see that there really is a person here. I'm going to speak to our operator readiness projects and programs. They're always built with the goal of cluster development, just like the destination development programs are, but these ones you'll see really focus in on that kind of one-on-one mentoring and coaching to operators and trying to advance the community or cluster by working one-on-one with operators and improving the product in the area. So with that, Joe, if you don't mind advancing the slide, it's great. I'm going to start with destination market readiness. Yeah, Joe's going to be Vanna a little bit, so apologies. I'll be cutting in to ask her to advance. Destination market readiness is a tourism assessment program that still has that operator readiness component. So this is a little bit of a combination program where there's elements of destination development and elements of operator readiness. Ultimately, at the end of the day, through DMR, we want to see communities go through and get an understanding of their tourism potential. Want to see some improved tourism product through that operator readiness component, and give communities an opportunity to come together and engage their broader tourism stakeholders. And we'll explain how that happens in the phases as we move through the slides here. So when we talk about who DMR is for, DMR was born out of a need that we recognize that STEP and STAR are excellent destination development tools, but they're very comprehensive, as you just saw. And not everybody's ready to take on a 12 to 24 month planning process or necessarily equipped with the kind of budget that you need to deliver those STEP and STAR programs. So DMR is meant for those communities who are maybe at the first stages of tourism development. We often look at this now as a first step in sustainable tourism development. So once communities go through a DMR program and have the opportunity to get some assessment work done to improve their product a little, implement some recommendations, in a few years' time, we may see them come back to then apply to go through a STEP or STAR program. So it's really for those communities that want a baseline understanding of their tourism potential. Maybe they need to formalize some structure around tourism leadership, get a clear set of goals and priorities together that can sort of unite tourism stakeholders in the community and be able to move forward in a more consistent way. When we see a DMR project come through, applicants for any of these projects are typically nonprofit groups that are stakeholders in tourism. So they may be regional tourism associations, destination marketing organizations. They could be municipalities in the case of DMR from time to time. So that community group would come forward and make the application. And then there would be a small working committee for DMR. Again, not to the extent that we would see in STEP and STAR, but because we have learned the lesson that these programs are typically most successful when there's good industry engagement, we do like to see a few stakeholders that are tourism operators within a community sit around that table and help guide the process. So the DMR model consists of 3 phases. We like our steps and phases in these programs. DMR's first step is community tourism assessment. So as Joanna mentioned, we have our sustainable community tourism screening tool that communities typically will fill out prior to going through a destination development or operator readiness program to get a sense of what the baseline is. So you as the consultant would have access to those completed community screeners so you can see what's been completed there. And that would be used to start your community tourism assessment in the DMR. The other methods that we'd suggest would be doing some site visits and interviews to really get a sense of the current tourism potential within the community, what the assets are, where the gaps might be, what some of the digital tools might look like, so how consumers find the community, book the community, all of those things. So that's the first phase in the DMR. The second phase of DMR is AMR, which we will talk about as the next program in more detail, but that's essentially where the operator readiness piece really comes in, because it is that one-on-one coaching support program. And typically in a DMR program, it's baked in to have 5 to 10 operators participate in the AMR. The third phase is capacity building sessions or training, as Joanna explained, similar to what you would have seen in STAR and STEP. So the scope for those capacity building sessions would come from your tourism assessment and the AMR projects that you would do to address any overarching needs within the community. And just like STEP and STAR, you may deliver these yourself as the consultant doing the DMR program, or if you recognize there's a big gap, say in social media or digitalization, and that's not your area of expertise, you can support the community as they contract another consultant who may be best suited to deliver those. As the consultant on the DMR project, there would still be an expectation that you'd maintain engaged in those capacity building sessions to provide some reporting at the end to let everybody know how things went. So in terms of the consultant role in the DMR model, as mentioned, it's certainly a less comprehensive program, and intentionally so, than STEP or STAR. But in a sense, these communities are at the early stages of tourism planning. So it's so important that they have that expertise and direction through folks like yourselves to be able to help them set direction and get organized. So there are some key deliverables that are part of this program. First, in the tourism assessment, there would be a summary report that you would provide that would identify those gaps and opportunities, you know, anything you may find through your initial work and through those assessments that you'd conduct, to give the community a sense of where they go next. So how can they start organizing themselves around tourism? What are the next steps they need to take to strengthen their tourism offering? In the AMR, and again, we'll talk more about all of the steps of AMR, but each operator that you'd work with in the AMR program would receive a work plan to help them take their next steps to become more market or purchase ready. There would be a top line report you'd give back to that organizing group of all of the AMR coaching sessions. So say it's a regional tourism association, you'd give them a top line report after all the AMRs have been completed to discuss any kind of recurrent themes, observations of consistent issues that operators may be experiencing within that community. AMR does have some continued mentoring built in. So as much as the DMR program tends to take place over about a 6-month time period, there will be an expectation that you're available to provide support to those AMR participants at 6 months post-plan and at 12 months post-plan. And similar to STEP and STAR, it's not an intensive requirement, but it would be a check-in, and we've built in a few hours of your time to just ensure that they're on the right track, maybe help them navigate any hurdles they may have come across in implementing their recommendations and that sort of thing. As I mentioned, there'd be an expectation that you'd help to coordinate the capacity building session, so identify what the themes might be and potentially connect the community to some supports you may know, being part of the consulting community in tourism, and then providing that summary report. So just making sure that the organizers know how they went, what the feedback was like, and maybe some recommendations for next steps in training now that you've kind of completed all of those components of DMR. So when we look at the budget, again, you'll see it's less comprehensive than the STEP and STAR. So if you just focus on the cost there along the top, you can see that the overall assessment, again, less comprehensive than STEP and STAR at $3,500 to do the assessment work. AMR is a cost of $3,200 per operator. So in this case, we are looking at a budget with 5 operators, so $16,000 in total. Capacity building sessions have a budget of $10,000 altogether. And then there's an administration fee, which would go to the organizing group. And that's $2,000 to support them to be able to manage the whole DMR process. And then we have some financing examples there, but I won't get into that as much here, as that won't be as relevant for you folks as consultants, but you can see how a project is typically built. So when we look at the key criteria that's outlined in the RFP for the DMR program, these are the criteria that have come out of that document. And it's very important that you demonstrate your experience in that one-on-one mentoring, because AMR, which we're going to speak about next, is such a key component of this program. So that background in business planning and operational planning to be able to give those operators that one-on-one guidance is very important. And then the other component is, of course, some experience in strategic assessment and planning. Previously, consultants weren't necessarily on a list for DMR on its own. DMR, because it's a relatively new program, was RFPs were issued to the consultants who were deemed eligible to deliver the AMR program. So it's new that DMR has its own concentrated list of consultants who will be delivering this program. And that's really the main differentiator between AMR and DMR, as you may have noticed in the RFP, is that to deliver DMR, there's an expectation that you've got some experience in strategic assessment and planning. So that's it for the DMR program. Now we'll move into AMR. Again, we love our acronyms, but AMR is Accelerated Market Readiness. And as mentioned, it really is about one-on-one coaching for tourism operators. We actually recently updated all of the tools available to consultants who deliver the AMR program, and we changed a lot of language in that documentation from being a consultant to being a coach, because it really is being about being that person who goes into a business and provides some tailored guidance and expertise and helps be that second set of eyes within a business to look through operations. You can look at marketing, revenue generation, profitability, all of those kinds of things, and provide businesses with the guidance that they need to become more market ready or purchase ready when it comes to tourism. You can go to that next one there, Joe. Thank you. So when we talk about accelerated market readiness, as you've seen, it's baked into a lot of the programs that we have. It's baked into every program, actually, that we are talking about today. And it is still meant to advance that goal of tourism cluster development. So it's typically delivered within a group or cluster of operators. We may see it in a geographic cluster or a sector-based cluster. So for example, we have an AMR in design for a group of winery operators in Nova Scotia. There are 20 winery operators who are going to go through the Accelerated Market Readiness Program to try to improve their tourism product offering. Or it could be within a geographic area, which we see all the time. So there are projects, currently happening in Central PEI, in Cape Breton, in areas of New Brunswick. It's certainly common to see them go in geographic areas as well. Typically, there's a group of at least 5 to 10 is the average, although there are some with up to 20 operators that we see go through as well. Again, the structure here is the same as what I'd mentioned before, where there's a nonprofit tourism entity that would be managing the overall program. They're going to be the ones who support recruitment of operators into the program, and they will be the ones who ultimately manage that budget. And then they will typically take those top line reports that come through the AMR program to think about future training for the geographic area, should it be a community, or for that sector group. So how AMR works, I put a quote in there that you may have seen in the documentation for AMR. We have quite a few operator quotes now all through those documents, but I thought this one was a great example of the role the consultant played for this business owner and what they were able to take out of the AMR program and their experience. So really AMR is about providing tourism operators with that expertise in the form of consultants to help them step back and look at their business and think about some ways to improve their purchase readiness or market readiness. So ultimately at the end of AMR, we want to see operators walk away with a set of recommendations that are actionable and achievable, that are affordable for them to implement and measurable to ultimately increase their profits or revenues, and also look at possibly extending their tourism season and really getting more out of those assets through the months of the year where they may be sitting idle. I've got the key components of AMR here on the slide. AMR does span over about 12 months whenever you think about those mentoring sessions, but the bulk of the work with AMR happens in the first few weeks. So when you look at the AMR program booklet, you'll see there are tools to accompany each one of these components to help you as the consultant navigate through those conversations. But the main parts of AMR, it starts with a phone interview with each participating operator to just get a sense of their business, talk about how many staff they have, what challenges they may have, when they're operational, all of those sorts of things. Then there's a half-day site visit, and it's very important that that takes place when the business is operational. We've learned over time it is not ideal to have the site visit happen when they are in full force and extremely busy, because then, as we all know, the operators are focused on their customers as they should be and don't necessarily have the time to spend with you as a consultant to really take a deep dive on their business. But we do encourage the businesses are operational so that you as the consultant can get a true sense of how people experience that tourism product or service. Following the site visit, you as the consultant would deliver a work plan that's totally customized to that business with actionable items. Really, those items can be very wide ranging. We've seen AMR programs that generate recommendations around signage and marketing. We've seen others that are focused on accounting and operations. It's really about what that business's individual needs are and where their pain points may be. And helping those entrepreneurs really address any challenges they may be experiencing that are preventing them from taking the next steps or taking their business to the next level. And then again, we have the coaching sessions, which we've already talked about a little bit, but at 6 months after you deliver that plan and 12 months after you deliver the plan, there's time built in to do a virtual coaching session just to talk about any barriers they may have had with implementation. So when we talk about the consultant role, I mean, we've been talking about this all along, but I can't stress enough that it's really to be that coach. So coming in and supporting the operator to give them the tools they need to do that work themselves and take their businesses to the next level when it comes to being market ready or purchase ready for tourism. Again, can't stress enough how important it is that those recommendations are actionable and achievable and affordable. You know, we don't want to run into a scenario where, of course, there's lots of great things that people can do within their businesses, but if it's not something that they can do with the resources they currently have, then it's not going to be of huge value. And sometimes AMR reports will even connect operators to other programs, be it ACOA funding or others, to help them implement whatever those recommendations might be. And then we've got some more on the key deliverables on that slide, which we've already talked about as well. So when we look at the budget for AMR, again, it's very similar to what you saw in the DMR. The professional fees to deliver AMR for 5 consultants is $16,000, so $3,200 per operator. And then there's an administration line that goes to the organizing group as well. So you can see the budget here is quite straightforward, and there's some financing details there as well, which I won't get into. So again, key criteria, the DMR is built off of the key criteria for the AMR. So you'll see it's similar criteria that's reflected here, but without that need for the strategic assessment piece necessarily. It's really about that experience in providing one-on-one mentoring and that knowledge of business planning and operational planning, because as mentioned, the recommendations from AMR can be very wide ranging, from accounting to marketing to experiential product development. So just need to know that the skills are there to be able to sit down and cover all aspects of the business when going through the AMR planning process. So those are the operator readiness programs. I don't know if anybody has any questions on those ones. Yeah, Bernie.
I do.
Hi.
Hi, it's Bernie here. Well, I've been doing this consulting now for a number of years, and currently I'm doing some AMRs. I'm just wrapping up a couple actually this week. One of the things I just want to mention, I know since you're kind of reviewing all the stuff right now, is there a chance that you can change some of those forms? You know, the appendixes that come out from you guys for the appendix C, D, and E. I find they're very difficult to type in, and they get skewed. I'm sure you've seen this all over the place, where they get skewed, and sometimes you try to PDF them and everything just kind of moves all over the place. So I've had I'm probably finishing up the 7th one now in the last number of months, and they've gotten skewed all over the place. So I was working on one last night, just wrapping it up, and I've given up on the form. And so I just put, you know, notes to appendix D and E, and I'm just typing it out in bullet form, because some of my clients basically have come back and said, oh, that form, especially the E one, the report, you know how it's in columns, it's very hard for them to read.
Yeah, that's a good point, Bernie. And I think that AMR was probably conceived at a time when people were still printing and writing on those forms.
Yeah,
so,
you're right, it was, because I remember like the first one I did many, many years ago, right after I got certified, I think it was filled in that way. And So, and it's funny because I wondered, it's going to cause me a problem when it gets down to you that it's not done exactly on the form, but the clients certainly understand that, and they pretty much ask, please don't put it on those forms.
No, it's a good point. And the forms are there in all of our programs as, guidance or suggestions, but we certainly see consultants take it and adapt it into their own reporting technique. But it is a good point that they should be fillable PDFs. So we will take that feedback and see what we can do with that.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point. I don't know if anybody else has any questions on anything we talked about today, or anything you might have seen in any of the program documentation. I mean, all of the program booklets and manuals are available on the TIAPEI website for you to be able to take a deeper dive, but we just wanted to make sure we highlighted sort of the main touch points in the programs.
I do have one other question. If I'm understanding it properly, or maybe I read it wrongly, I'm not sure, but do I understand there's only going to be one intake from now on through TIAPEI for all of these programs? And the only people that's going to be disseminating them is TIAPEI?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
TIAPEI for PEI, so it won't be, Central Coastal Tourism, and it won't be, whoever, Points East or...
Yeah, it's TIAPEI for all of Atlantic Canada. We'll be managing the standing offer list. And
I
it is
see, for all of Atlantic Canada. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a bit new. So for those who may not be familiar with the process, we used to do more of a continuous intake in the programs. And what we found is that they're really growing in popularity, which is great. So we wanted to really formalize the process and have a good, rigorous structure in place managed through TIAPEI to do that call for proposals once a year. So the other piece we should mention is that these programs all have fairly comprehensive evaluation tools that accompany them, and we have just actually strengthened the ones for AMR in particular. So, as feedback comes up through the programs, there may be some that we pass along or revisit with consultants, and we'll revisit eligibility if required based on feedback that comes through those tools as well.
Great.
Any other questions? I can't see the chat. Is there anything in there? Corinne, or if you can see it.
No, there's nothing in the chat, but there is both Whitney's and Joanna's emails. If you do have questions for either one of them, you can contact them directly. And we have our contact information on our website if anyone has further questions.
And so we submit, we check the boxes of what we want to apply for. We get a note back that says, woohoo, bingo card, you've hit all boxes, or you qualified for one box or two boxes. And then that standing offer or qualification or certification, or however we word it, is for Atlantic Canada.
That's right.
Yeah.
Awesome. So it could be we tick all the boxes, but you say, we think you're ready for these two boxes, but not these two. Ticking all doesn't disqualify you if you're only for some, but not
That's
others.
right.
Yeah,
That's a
exactly.
good point.
Yeah, each program will be evaluated individually. So if you take all four and check them, there'll be a different committee that looks at their requirements for each program. So it doesn't mean that just because you're disqualified for one, you're disqualified for all. And it is important to note, I mean, we have some clear limitations, obviously, with COVID at the moment. We see lots of site visits built into these programs, and we understand that that's not necessarily possible right now. So, I think we all hoped that maybe by the time this list was finished, there'd be a little more flexibility around Atlantic Canada, which still may not be the case, but people have certainly been able to get creative when it comes to delivering these programs virtually, and that'll all be addressed within the individual RFPs for these programs as they go out, depending on what the circumstances are at the time.
What's your time frame for doing the call out in future?
It'll likely be, do you mean the next year?
Yeah. I assume they're all done for 2021 at this point.
I think it might be like next January or this time next year. I think I'll kind of wait and see. And we did say, like, this is our first time moving it to once a year, but if there seems to be a lot of interest, to maybe needs to be twice a year, we're not sure, but we'll try this year and see how it goes.
Okay.
But open to being flexible. We had chatted with Corinne about that. So let's kind of wait and see.
And I'll just mention, since I've been doing this for a while, these ladies at Acoa, like Whitney, and I don't know Whitney, but other than, you know, in passing, but I don't know her well, but I've known Johanna forever and ever. And they are fabulous gals for answering questions and helping you along the way with anything related. And I've known Corinne forever and ever, and worked with Corinne in past jobs that she's had, and they're amazing too. So you guys that are new on here, I just want you to know that they're all great and they're very approachable. So
Yeah, we hope to be a resource for you, as you, especially if through your first few, it is, you know, a bit of a learning curve. And if you do need to have more check-ins, and that's certainly we're open to that, right? Great. Well, we really appreciate you tuning in, taking the time, and you have our emails if there's anything that strikes you as you kind of get into more of the weeds of it. And I guess we'll leave it at that. It's recorded too, right, Corinne?
Yes, so we will have the recording of this session up on our website this afternoon if anyone wants to review, or if there's any others that missed the session today.
awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Thank
time.
you.
See ya.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.